Okay, welcome to Module 4 of Catharsis Music Theory class. We've been having a great time. We are getting into the next segment here on page 29 in the notes, if you're looking. So we've been just recently been talking about perfect intervals 1, 4, 5, and 8 of the major scale. And we've been talking about the major intervals, which are the 2nd, 3rd, 6th, and 7th scale degrees of the major scale. So now there's 5 notes that we haven't hit. There's 5 slices of our octave that we have not touched upon. So we've gotten, if you count the root and octave as one pitch, we've got 7 total pitches and intervals that we've dealt with, plus the 8th octave. There's 5 more to deal with, so we're going to unpack. 4 of them are all called minor intervals. There are minor intervals that are taken from a modified 2nd, 3rd, 6th, and 7th degrees of the major scale. But you take the major 2nd, 3rd, 6th, and 7th, and you diminish them by 1/2 step, or flat them. So if you're going from C up to D, that's a whole step, and that would be called a major 2nd. If I reduce it by a 1/2 step, it would be C up to D flat. That would be called a minor 2nd. And the same is true with the 3rds, 6th, and 7ths. So I'm going to build a chart on the board behind me and talk through some things. And if you have a question, interrupt me. We're going to build almost all of these intervals right away. Please don't forget that you can do this on any note. We're just starting with the note C because it's a little easier to think about at this stage. But this principle applies from F, from B flat, from absolutely all of the 12 notes where you start to create intervals. Okay? So, starting with C at the bottom, the major scale would have a whole step, another whole step, a 1/2 step, a whole step, a whole step, a whole step, another 1/2 step. There's our C major scale with an extra octave on the root. Okay? Number of 1/2 steps involved. Between C and D, how many 1/2 steps we got? 2. And that's called a major 2nd. Between C and E, how many 1/2 steps do we have? 4, which is called a major 3rd. Now, in day-to-day usage, we don't ever say, let's go 4 1/2 steps. We say, let's go a major 3rd. But you have to understand that the underlying principle is that a major 3rd is equivalent to 4 1/2 steps. Keep the 1/2 step thing in your mind at all times as we're going forth. So from C up to F is now only 5 1/2 steps. They call that a perfect 4th. From C up to G is 7 1/2 steps. We call this a perfect 5th. 9 1/2 steps is a major 6th. 11 1/2 steps is a major 7th. 12 1/2 steps is an octave. And I, of course, left out at the bottom 0, which is a root. With me so far? So these are the diatonic intervals that we've been looking at. So the minor intervals are the ones in between. So from C up to D flat, C sharp, is only 1 1/2 step, and we call it a minor 2nd. Everybody see that? Except for Daniel. Okay. The next whole is D sharp or E flat, which has 3 1/2 steps, and we call that a minor 3rd. We've diminished the major interval by a 1/2 step, calling it a minor 3rd. Now we're going to skip this one here and come back to it. But the between G and A, you got 8 1/2 steps to G sharp or an A flat. We call that a minor 6th. Does that make sense? We're going to work with this for a minute. B flat is our remaining one on this segment. 10 1/2 steps, which we call a minor 7th. Now take for a second, and let's look at it from a different note. If I start with the note G, and I move up to the note B flat, how many 1/2 steps have I moved? From G up to B flat. So you can glance on your keyboards there that you have in different parts of your notes as a reference. Here's G. If I go up a step and a half, or 3/2 steps, 1, 2, 3, G is up to B flat. And what do I call that interval? I call it a minor third. So minor third, a minor third is 3/2 steps, right? So the minor third above G is B flat. With me so far? Okay, so let's do, what's a minor sixth above E? How many half steps? How many half steps on a minor sixth? 8 is the right answer. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So from E up to C natural is a minor sixth. Does that make sense? So if I play them together, I'm playing a minor sixth. If I play them in succession, I went up a minor sixth from the first note to the second note. That was the distance that I traveled. Okay? Another way of doing this is to go from E to the major sixth, because you know your E major scale so well. E major scale is E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D sharp, E. So you're going to go to the sixth scale degree, E to C sharp, and diminish it by a half step, creating a minor sixth, E up to C. With me so far? Okay? Absolutely. So I can look at it from one of two ways. To get a minor sixth above E, I can know that a minor sixth has 8 half steps, and I can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. E up to C is a minor sixth, or 10 half steps away. Alternatively, I know my major scales really well because Austin's been telling me to study them every day, multiple times a day. So I know that the E major scale is E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D sharp, E, with C sharp being the 6th scale degree. So I can go E to C sharp as a major sixth. I then diminish that interval by 1 half step to make it a minor sixth. Okay? So let's look at B flat. What is a major seventh above B flat? A is the right answer. We can go up 12 half steps to an octave and then back it down 1. We can go up 11. Or we can just know that the B flat major scale is B flat, C, D, E flat, F, G, A, B flat, and A being our 7th scale degree. Because we've been practicing and memorizing our scales, right, at the house. Okay? So from that formula, you can determine the interval of any two notes. But to determine the interval, you kind of have to know the major scales to do it quick. Because the names of the intervals are all related to somehow that major scale formula. Does that make sense? Okay, let's look at it on the fretboard for a minute. What gets more fun with the fretboard is because you start one string at a time, or the string hopping thing that you guys looked at last week gives you all kinds of options on ways to play in it, which is why we're going through it like this. So let's start from C. Here's a C. Nice, easy one to get to. Now somebody give me one of those intervals, just call it out, anyone, randomly. Not everybody at once, it gets confusing. Minor 6, whoever said minor 6 gets a candy on the next go round. What's the minor 6th above C? A flat, which would happen to be because our chart shows that, so C up to A flat, which is 8 half steps. Now I can go 8 frets, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So, which out of context sounds a little funky, but if you put it in a musical context, it would make a lot more sense. And so minor 6th is from C up to A flat, can go up 8 frets to here, but I can also find an A flat at the 2nd fret of the G string. That's the same pitch. So if I'm on the A string 3rd fret C, and I go G string 1st fret A flat, I've got a minor 6th, and it's easier to play them together. So that's the sound of a minor 6 together. Okay? Somebody pick a random note out of the 12. F sharp's a good one. That's tricky because the F sharp major scale. Now you might want to glance at that scale practice sheet that I had you pull out so you can see what the F sharp major scale is. Okay? Somebody give me a random interval. Anybody? Don't go easy. Major 5th is a wrong answer because there's no such thing as a major 5th, if you'll let me correct you. Because they're only perfect fifths. Now, well, let me go ahead and mention this, because you said major fifth. Yeah, they're only perfect fifths. There's no such thing as a major fifth. I'll go ahead and do the fifth, and we'll come back to seventh, okay? So a perfect fifth above F sharp, how many half steps in a perfect fifth? 7. So I could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to this note, which happens to be what? C sharp's the right answer. So perfect fifth means it's on the major scale. So if you look at your scale reference sheet, F sharp, second scale degree G sharp, third scale degree A sharp, then B. Fifth scale degree is C sharp. So F sharp up to C sharp on this string, on the E string. But I can also get a C sharp on the A string. A, B flat, B, C, C sharp. Boom, there's my perfect fifth. And that fifth, that's the power chord we referenced earlier. So you can take those two notes, that fifth, and create almost every rock and roll song in the world. And so forth. That's just moving a fifth around. It's just moving the power chord for that old classic Smoke on the Water, right? Now, give me another random note. Dave, random note. Did you say D? E is an eggplant, a typical guitar player choice. I recommend it highly. Okay, and you said a seventh. You want major or minor? Major seventh above E. How many half steps? A major seventh is 11 half steps on the fretboard, but it's the 7th scale degree on the scale reference sheet, right? It's 11 half steps, but it's the 7th scale degree. So if you're looking at your scale reference sheet and you see the scale E, and you said, I want to do a major seventh, well, you just go to the 7th column and boom, there it is. And that note is a D sharp, okay? But if we went up 11 frets, we'd find it the same way. If we went up an octave or 12 frets and then backed it down one or diminished it by a half step, we get there the same way. So we're going from E to D sharp. Here's E, open. Here's my 12th fret. This would be 11th fret. But I can also get that D sharp 1 fret above the D string. Here's the D string. Here's the 1 fret above. D sharp. So if I play the D sharp fretted and the E open, now I hear a major seventh. Which sounds a little weird by itself, but in the musical context, it's one of the most gorgeous intervals there, right? So let's do a couple more. Random note, Grant Beckman. Random note, any of the 12. B flat's a good one. Now Daniel Guevara, only because I'm picking on you tonight. I've decided I'm going to pick on you tonight. Okay, random interval. Easy or hard doesn't matter. Pick an interval. It could be blue, it could be black. Just pick one.
Perfect fifth.
Perfect fifth is good. Let's do. Now, if you're looking at the scale practice sheet, you can glance at the B flat major scale. The fifth scale degree is B flat C D E flat F 1 2 3 4 5. It's an F. You can also get there by saying there's 7 half steps from B flat to F. Okay, so there's our perfect fifth. Now I'm going to choose one. How about a minor second? We haven't done a minor second yet, right? So how about a minor second with E? Because I know that David likes E. Well, let me show you this. E on this top string from the player's perspective, open, is that E right there. A minor second is how many half steps? 1 half step, right? Minor second is 1 half step. So I only need to go 1 fret up. Now here's where the fretboard can get even more fun. Because I can take an open string that's lower in pitch than an adjacent string that might be higher in pitch, but make a higher note with it, okay? So I could take my B string to put the E on. B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp. Here's my E. And I could make E here and F over here and make my minor second like this. But where the fretboard makes it even more fun is I can reverse that. And now I can make the F be here. Now I'm on the 6th fret of B string, make it an F, and I can play an open E, and it sounds like this. So I can play it either way. There's an F here with an E open, or an F here with an E fretted. I can get the same result either way. Now, guitar purists will say it's a slightly different tonality because the strings are slightly different lengths and maybe of different types of metal, so they'll slightly sound different. And they're right, but in general, for music making, you've got more options to make those kinds of intervals on the fretboard. With the keyboard, you kind of just, here's your 2 buttons and you're there, right? So this opens up a lot more possibilities, even though the complexity sometimes can keep us down with the music theory thing. I love this, doing this right here. Now what I got going on here is a D sharp on the B string, and a half step or a major second above that is the open E. So you've got the D sharp and the E, which right here sounds kind of ugly, but in the context with some other harmony, sounds really nice. So don't shy away from minor seconds or major sevenths or those that the interval by itself sounds weird because it's out of context. All are available for good music making, right? Brett has a good question. I'm going to move over here.
Okay.
Unless it's a fretboard question.
Yeah, right now,
I'll stay here.
we're doing intervals at like 2 notes at the same time.
Yes.
So what's the difference between interval and chord?
Gotcha. The question is, right now we're doing intervals that are 2 notes at the same time. So what's the difference between an interval and a chord? And as we're going to find out in Module 5 and further next week, a chord is defined by 3 or more notes being played together. Okay? Sometimes when I mentioned earlier there was that thing that the guitar players call a power chord. And that's more of a convention. Everybody says that. Technically in music theory, just 2 pitches is not a chord. It's only an interval. But the intervals are the building blocks of chords. So once we've learned all these intervals, then we're going to take all these intervals and build them into all the different types of chords that are out there. Yeah? Make sense? Good question. Really good question. Candy, thank you. You know what? I think you get 2. You get 2, and you can take 2 of the same, or you can mix it up, Starburst and chocolate, or oh, you got the Reese's with the thing? Yeah, gotcha. Beautiful. Okay, so our next little portion is on the next page. I mean, no, excuse me, still on page 29, but it's the next thing down where it says tritone. So tritone is a very special, very unique interval, and it's the reason why I saved it for last. I'm going to start over just for fun, because so when we just that last little bit. If you can't edit it, great, but it's not a big deal, because everybody's just watching at home, waiting for me to go on. So the tritone is a special interval. It's the only one we haven't covered yet. If you'll notice on my little chart back here that I had left out if we started from C, I'd left out the interval between F and G. We did 5 half steps, we did 7, we didn't do the one in between. So we're going to do that now. The distance between C and F sharp is 6 half steps, and it has a few different names to it. One is the tritone. Sometimes we'll put 2 capital T's. Another is the diminished fifth, and the other is the augmented fourth. Okay? Now the tritone has the most tension built into it in and of itself, of any other interval. We talked at the very beginning, the perfect interval, that they were very consonant, harmonious, stable. Okay? The opposite of a perfect interval is the tritone. The tritone is the most unstable. It's the most dissonant. It's the most interval that wants resolution. It wants movement out of it. It wants to be changed. It doesn't like to stay where it is. It's the most tension. Okay? Now, the word tritone, if you remember at the very beginning of the course, we talked about that. We use the terms half steps and whole steps. But other people around the world, more British people and that kind of thing, will use the term tone and semitone to mean the same thing. Okay? So a tone is like a whole step, and a semitone is like a half step. So a tritone, as we're starting to learn, is composed of 6 half steps. You could also describe that as 3 whole steps. And if you use the other terminology, 3 tones. Hence the word tritone. Make sense? But if you use half steps and whole steps all the time, you never really see the word tone come in except for tritone. So you do see this term all the time. Okay? Now, what's funny, because of the instability of it, The church at several different periods historically has outlawed the usage of the tritone. It was the devil's interval, and I've got a little thing in the notes there. And if you're curious, this is not part of the required portion of the class. If you're curious, click the link that's in the notes there, or type it out, where there's a little bit of a history on how the interval. What is it? The diabolus in musica, which meant the devil in the music, which was a tritone. What's amazing is how so many composers deftly inserted tritones in their music that was meant for the church in ways that masked that they were even there subtly in order to bring the tension. Because music, and this is one you can put on your refrigerator, music is all about creating and releasing tension. Music is all about creating and releasing tension. And if the church says that you're not able to use a tritone, it's really taking away a lot of your ability to create tension that you could thus release. Okay? So, ask a question.
Can you play a good example of the tritone?
Absolutely going to. In fact, we're going to do several different versions of it. So, moving over to the keyboard for a second. Pick a random note there, Mr. Alex Morales. G sharp's a good one. Okay, so here's G. So I'm going to go up a half step to G sharp. It's the middle of my three groupings of blacks. You'll all know this because you've been working on your keyboard stuff. So, how do I get to a tritone from G sharp? 3 whole steps, 6 half steps, right? Anybody know what note it's going to be before we get there? Because I'll throw out your scale practice sheet could help you with this. Okay? If you call it an A flat, you can find the 4 and the 5 of A flat and find the 1 in the middle. Right? If you know your A flat scale and it's on your scale practice sheet, A flat, B flat, C, D flat, E flat. The 4 of A flat is D flat. The 5 of A flat is E flat. So the 1 in the middle is going to be the, and the people said tritone, right? So it's an A flat up to D or G sharp up to D, right? But in this class we don't use the G sharp scale, if you remember that, because it's nobody uses it. We always call it A flat. So it sounds like this by itself. Here's C to F sharp. Up here. The classic one is the horror movie Psycho that had the strings that were going. If I put it on a string sound, it would make more sense and be higher. And the lady in the background would be going, right? Because it's this tension thing, right? Now, I'll also say that without the tritone, the blues probably wouldn't exist. Because the blues has this built-in tension where the tritone is in almost every chord in the blues, which we're going to find out as we go further. Okay, so it's again, it sounds ugly maybe by itself or scary or puts us on end, but that has musical value and use as well, right? And in certain contexts, it's the most beautiful interval you can imagine. So it's just putting it in a context. So let's look at it over here on the guitar. Let's go with Dave's favorite E. Eddie ate dynamite, goodbye Eddie. Here's an E. If you remember, there's the dots on the 3rd, 5th, 7th, and 9th frets, okay? The 5th and 7th fret are 5 and 7 half steps, 5 and 7 frets above the root E. So you'll find that at the 2nd dot is a 4th, E up to A. You'll find that the 3rd dot is a 5th, E up to B. So in between the 4th and the 5th is our wonderful tritone, E up to A sharp or B flat. Okay? And for all you religious people, you can ignore the fact that I'm using the reference of a secular band. So all you rock and rollers know exactly what I'm playing, and I will not utter the words of Mordor here. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to say their name, okay? But what's happening is I've got an E here, and on the A string at the 7th fret is an octave above that E. So I just went up an octave. So here's an E, and here's an octave above that. And then the next note in the riff is the tritone, which if I played it like this, it just sounds weird because it's got to go somewhere. It's got to do something else. And this note in that riff sets up the tension to be resolved by the next one. So if I go, I can't just go. It's got to be resolved. I've got this tritone that makes me want to go down to the next note. Okay. In the midst of a chord, this note's an A sharp or a B flat, right? So the tritone above E is an A sharp or a B flat, which means I can get that A sharp or B flat here on the A string as well. So if I did it together, it would sound like this. Here's a fifth, nice and harmonious. Here's a diminished fifth. Okay, regular fifth. And I want to make a statement too while I'm here that I should have made earlier. Diminished fourth and augmented fifth have everything to do with the letter name that's being used. Okay, so an E to a B is a fifth. So if I need to describe the note as it relates to B, I would call the tritone a diminished fifth, and I would use the letters B flat because it's a B that's been flatted. But if I needed to, in a theoretical situation, to describe the note as it related to the A or the fourth, then I would call it an A sharp. So here's an E and A, fourth. These two open strings, Eddie 8, dynamite, E and A together. If I take it up a half step, now it's an augmented fourth, and I would call it an A sharp. Does that make sense? I call it an augmented fourth because I'm taking the fourth, which is an A, augmenting it. Or I call it a diminished fifth if I'm calling it from the fifth of a B and flatting it one half step, making it a diminished fifth. Okay? So I would never call it a diminished fifth and an A sharp in the same conversation. Because an A sharp is referencing a fourth, right? So the tritone has three names. Tritone's the easy one. But if you're writing out in letters, you might need to specifically write it as an A sharp, or in other situations, specifically a B flat. And then you would call that an augmented fourth or diminished fifth based on which of the two that you used to stay consistent with the letter names. Make sense? You're not going to run into writing it out too often, but you should at least understand the concept. Okay? So if you go a little higher with the tritone, it's going to sound like this. But you also hear that let me do it here. There they are separated. Here's a root going down to the fifth of it, but I'm actually going down a fourth, and I'll explain that later. Here's a C. Let's do a C. C, which goes down to G, and they're kind of like root and fifth. But if I go down to this now this is a diminished fifth, and now here's a C and an F sharp, which by themselves sound weird. But if I'm getting funky, I'm sorry. And suddenly, that dissonance doesn't sound so bad when it just sounds funky and bluesy, right? So, diminished fifth, augmented fourth, called a tritone. 6 half steps, most amount of tension. Make sense so far? I've got a couple of cow-eyed looks, but I'm going to keep going because nobody's brave enough to ask a question here. Okay? Now, okay, so flip over to page 30. We're up page 30 now. And now we know all of the intervals. We know all the perfect ones, 1, 4, 5. We know all the major ones, 2, 3, 6, 7. We know the minor ones that are 2, 3, 6, 7, but are diminished a little bit. And we know our tritone. So we have these 13 total intervals, if you count the root as one, because it's a unison. 13 total intervals that are our basic building blocks for making music. Now the trick here at this stage is being able to hear these intervals and know them like you know the path on your way home from work. You don't even have to think about it. So earlier I was giving you some musical examples. On this page, on page 30, I've given you a whole bunch more. And at the bottom there's a website, earmaster.com, that has musical examples of these. If you want to use that, you can use the app that you bought, doesn't matter. I urge you to spend time every single day on either or both boards if you can, finding these intervals, drilling yourself on what's the major second above B? Oh, that's the C sharp. What's the minor sixth above D? That's B flat. What's the perfect fifth above G? That's D natural. Drill yourself on that mentally using your scale practice sheet and your interval reference sheet, which we're going to have in a little bit. Then do the same thing on either board. Find those notes, find those intervals on the boards. Practice with yourself. E flat to G flat. That is 3 half steps. That's called a minor third. Put that on the keyboard. If you've got access to both boards, do it on both boards at the same time, if you can. And then probably even most importantly, sing it every time you do it. Every time you've got a board together, sing that interval. Minor third, major third, perfect fourth, tritone, perfect fifth, minor sixth, major sixth, minor seventh. Okay, I'm being silly, but I do this every day and do it at multiple places on the keyboard, multiple places on the fretboard. The more you do, I just sing ascending intervals. You also want to do them descending when you do them in succession. Because remember, you call the same thing when you play them together as you do as the notes played in succession. So that's why these are mostly ascending intervals that are here, but if you'll see on some of the entries I put on page 30, I've also got some that I've listed as descending as some options. And again, that website has even more options. It'll play it for you. You can listen to it and then sing along, okay? Drill yourself, because there might be quizzes down the road. Drill yourself, ear training. If you know all 13 intervals, it's like knowing all 26 letters of the alphabet, okay? And you can build any word possible if you know all 13 intervals and you know what they sound like and you know where they're at. Making sense? Am I building a case? Okay? Go for it. The possibilities are so huge if you invest in yourself now to understand where the intervals on the boards are, how they interrelate mentally, and what they sound like. Okay? And the people said tritone. I'm just kidding. Some people are going to get, okay, all you religious people on the video, just calm down. I'm making a joke. Let's move on to page 31. We had something for in-person people. We had a little glitch on getting the page numbers for some reason, but consonance and dissonance, we're going to talk about for a couple of minutes here. Intervals have different degrees of consonance and dissonance. An interval that is consonant can be described as being at rest, stable, or resolved, like we've talked about. It has less tension implied than an interval that is dissonant. Dissonant intervals are unstable, they have more tension, and they need to be resolved. I showed you the extremes between the perfect intervals, which are the most consonant, and the tritone, and secondarily the minor second, that half-step interval, are considered the most dissonant, right? But all the other intervals have different levels of consonance and dissonance, okay? This next sentence, I think, is probably the most important one to me, and it's where I've got some of those capital letters. It starts with emotional response. Emotional response to consonance and dissonance is cultural, contextual, and experiential. It's not absolute. Where the church started creating orphan artists by saying these sounds are okay and these sounds are not okay, came about because of their own bias, their own cultural and contextual thoughts on how to deal with, say, the tritone and what they responded to it. Be careful to never make the statement in your mind, I like that interval and I don't like this interval. It's kind of like saying, I like the letters H and J, but I'm not fond of Q and X. It's very similar, okay? Because you'll find great beauty in the dissonance as your ear becomes more accustomed to it. You'll find great emotional content in sounds that on their own don't seem like they have the content that you're thinking they are, but in another situation they will. Be very careful artistically that you don't make assumptions about intervals, and as we progress further into chords and other sounds. All sounds and combination of notes were meant by God for us to mess with, okay? Be careful of the idea that it's a religious concept that says these styles or these notes are somehow more spiritual than the others. Because on one level, everything we're studying in this course is extremely spiritual and extremely divine. On another level, this is all man's system trying to make sense of the science that God put into place of sound. Okay? Don't make a doctrine out of your preference as you're moving forward with this. That's where the tall grass lies. Okay, so going on, the frightening dissonance of the tritone and the string figure from Psycho can be beautiful in a blues song. I mentioned that earlier. Be careful when making assumptions about the intended atmosphere or emotional response. Last thing I'm going to say on it, let's say you're going to do a soaking set. and you want everything to be nice and sweet and harmonious so everybody can soak it in, don't make the mistake of thinking, well, I probably shouldn't put any of those minor intervals or those tritones in there. Because it's like saying, I'm going to make a speech, but I want to avoid the letters Q, R, and X. It's the same equivalence. Because I'll do a soaking set that's very nice and peaceful and harmonious and use all 12 notes in the space of a minute and do them again. It's a matter of how you use them. Don't make the mistake that the building blocks at this stage have it. Okay, I've overstated it. You understand what I'm saying. This is a very important thing to me. Okay, moving on to the next page. Here's where it's going to start getting fun. Okay, so we are on the page for inverting an interval. Now, if you'll hold the question as why are we studying this for a couple of more segments, inverting intervals is going to be hugely valuable a couple of things later. So the why, if you'll just trust me for a minute, but any other questions you got to jump in on. To invert an interval, you take an interval that's always measured from the bottom note to the top note, and you flip them vertically, making the bottom into the top and the top into the bottom. Now, the name of the interval will likely change because the distance between the bottom and the top notes have now changed. On the surface, does that sort of make sense? I invert an interval, I'm basically flipping it vertically. And then, if I'm flipping it vertically, the distance is going to change, and which means the name is. Okay? So, let's look at it on the keyboard for a second, because theory makes a lot more sense on the keyboard, intuitively. Somebody give me a random note. B is a good one. Is that a B? It is harder upside down than you think. Okay. Now, give me a random interval. Remember we had all those 12 intervals? Give me a random one. That's a good one. Perfect fifth above B is what? And if you've got your scale reference sheet out, that might help. F sharp is the right answer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. B up to F sharp is a perfect fifth. Now, if I invert the interval, I can do it one of two ways. I can take the bottom note, B, and put it on the top B, or I could do the same thing in reverse. I can put the F sharp on the bottom. I'll get the same result either way. If the B is on the bottom and I'm going up to an F sharp, that's 7 half steps. We call that a perfect fifth. If the F sharp's on the bottom and I'm going up to a B, how many half steps is that? 5 is the right answer. What do you call 5 half steps? Close, perfect fourth. That's all right. Now that was on the chart we just wrote, and I know this is all brand new, right? So check this out. If I take a perfect fifth and I flip it, and I put the F sharp in this case, or the fifth, and I put it on the bottom, F sharp up to B, it's a smaller interval. This is 7 half steps, B to F sharp, but F sharp up to B is only 5 half steps. Remember at the beginning of the evening we talked about that if notes are in succession, you go from the first note to the second note, but if they're played together, you go from the bottom to the top. But if you reverse the bottom and top notes, distance is now going to change. We call intervals based on their distance. A major second has 2 whole steps. Major seventh has 11. It's all based on distance. So when you invert an interval, the distance will change, meaning the name will change. Okay? Now, let's look at some principles with this. The next paragraph. When you're inverting intervals, the perfect intervals will invert with each other without changing their quality. In fact, there was a perfect example just then. We had a perfect fifth. When we inverted it, it became a perfect fourth. Now, this one might seem silly because it seems too obvious, but think about it. A perfect octave, if you invert it, becomes a unison. And a unison becomes a perfect octave. The fourths become fifths, and the fifths become fourths. They don't change their quality, they stay perfect. It's part of the reason why we named them perfect. Why do they call it perfect fourth? If it's on the major scale, why not call it a major fourth? This is one of the reasons. Because perfect intervals will always only invert each other and will retain their quality. Okay? That makes sense so far on the beginning of it. Now the next sentence on the notes starts with the word however. However, whosoever. Major and minor intervals will invert with each other while exchanging their quality. So if I take a major interval and I invert it, it's going to be minor something. If I take a minor interval and I invert it, it's going to become a major something. Let's see. Let's go back to C because it's really easy, right? But if you got your scale practice sheet, you're going to realize when you invert intervals, you're actually dealing with 2 scales at once. So don't let that freak you out. Let me explain. If I go from C and I make it a major third, C, D, E, third scale degree, how many half steps? 4 in a major third. A major third is called my 4 half steps. Now we are creating this interval and naming it based on the C major scale, right? Because C is our bottom note. Now if we invert it and we put the C up top, E goes up to C, much larger interval. Now we named this interval based on the E major scale, right? Because we named intervals from the bottom up based on the scale. So glance at your scale reference sheet if you don't already have it memorized. The E major scale. Does the E major scale have C natural in it? No, it does not, right? So C is going to be something else. E, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 half steps. What's the interval that's called 8 half steps? Not everybody at once. It gets really confusing. It's a minor sixth. Major sixth of E is C sharp, if you see on your scale practice sheet. Perfect fifth is E to B. In between them is a minor sixth. So, to sum up, and I'll grab Alex's question, a C up to E is a major third, 4 half steps. If I invert it, it becomes an E up to C, which is now 8 half steps, which is called a minor sixth. You can reference it with half step numbers or with whichever scale is being referenced. Alex.
Could you call that an E diminished?
Now, that's a great question. He said, can you call it an E diminished sixth? In the ivory tower of academic music theory, they would say, no, you can't, for all of these massive reasons that don't matter at all in making music. To me, what matters is we really only call diminished when we're dealing with the tritone. And we really only diminish or augment 4th and 5th intervals. Technically, there is some aspects of music theory where what I just said is incorrect. So my music theory professor from college is spinning in his grave right now by saying that. But in the practicality of making day-to-day music, we never actually say a diminished sixth or an augmented whatever. We only say diminished or augmented as it relates to 4ths and 5ths, perfect intervals. And when we start getting into some of the chords, it'll make a little more sense because we use the terms a little more there. So there's an aspect that to say diminished sixth would be right in certain contexts and wrong in others, but it's a bunch of hoo-ha that don't matter, in my opinion. And for those from Germany, hoo-ha means stuff that I don't think matters. Hoo-ha. Anyway, so let me review this. Grant Beckman has a question.
So how would you write that out? Because you're saying minor and you're saying C minor, C sharp. So how would you write that out?
Okay, I'm going to try to answer your question. He's saying, I think, don't worry about me repeating it. I think I'm going to try to answer it here because I think you might be confused on a term or two. How would you write it out? This is a non-notation music theory class. I think it's absolutely important for some people to learn the golf clubs and the staff, and notation I think is hugely important. This is a non-notation, which I think is just as important for other people. So I always write things from the bottom up. So if I write an interval C going up to E, that distance is this way. That's a major third. I'm doing a capital M. And that's 4 half steps. But if I invert it, I put the E on the bottom, up to C, that interval is now 8 half steps, and it's called a minor sixth. Okay? So when you say, how do you write it? When you're not using musical notation, I'm really keen on where it is on the page. E up to C or C up to E. Does that answer, sort of?
Yeah.
Okay, so when you said C sharp, I'm thinking we don't have a C sharp going on in here, so maybe it was a terminology thing.
Well, in the context of like the E major scale,
Mm-hmm.
the E major scale you have C sharp, so it's playing
Okay.
C minor.
Okay, so an E major scale has E, F sharp, G sharp, A. You don't have your scale reference sheets there to double check my work. So there's an E major scale. Okay, so if we start on the note E and we make a major sixth interval above it, this distance is 9 half steps, which we call a major sixth. If we invert it, we're doing a C sharp at the bottom with an E up top, and that interval is 3 half steps, What do we call 3 half steps? A minor third. So what happens is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Based on the formula.
It's based on the major scale formula.
Or just the interval inversion formula.
Yes. There's an interval inversion formula that's sort of being created here, yeah. So what happens is perfect intervals always invert each other without changing their quality, but major and minor intervals will always invert by exchanging their quality. So a minor third becomes a major sixth, or major sixth becomes a minor third. And when you do it, the total of their half steps will always equal 12. Because it's an octave. How many half steps in an octave? Right? So if I take an E over C sharp and then I take the E up an octave, here, now the E is above the C sharp, between the bottom E and the top E is always going to be 12 half steps. It's always going to be an octave. So when you're inverting intervals, you can always look for, wait a second, the half steps got to line up to 12 because there's only 12 steps in an octave. Okay? So if you look at the bottom of the page, there's shortcuts for interval inversions. The rule of 9 is where the name of the interval, major second, minor, whatever, the names of the intervals numbers will always add up to 9. The half steps will always line up to 12. Okay? So here we go. A root has 0 half steps. You know what? Hang on. I need to jump ahead. I already got this written out. Look at the next page, table of intervals. But you might want to, we're going to be going back and forth between these 2 pages, the invert intervals and the table of intervals. Okay? You know what? Let's stay on the one we're on. That table of intervals I'll unpack here in a second. I thought I had something else on there with the inversion. Sorry about that. A root inverts to an octave. 0 half steps, 12 half steps. Right? Okay, 1 half steps is called what? What do we call 1 half step?
Minor second.
Minor second, right? 1 half step, minor second. It inverts to what? Major 7. Now the rule of 9 says 2 plus what equals 9. It's going to be a 7th something. The rule of the qualities inverting for majors and minors means the minor is going to become a major. And the rule with the half steps mean if this is 1 half step, then this is going to have to be 11, because 11 plus 1 is 12. Did I just go too fast? Okay, so there's 3 things. But one wrote either 12 half steps, 9 on the scale degree name, majors and minors invert each other, and perfects stay perfect. I think if I keep going, it's going to make some more sense. But if it doesn't, y'all let me know. Okay? Let's go 2 half steps. What do we call 2 half steps? There's a term for it. 2 half steps is called a major second. Everybody say major second. Okay? If we invert that, okay, let's look at it from a half step perspective for a second. The rule of half steps means that the inverted intervals have to add up to 12 half steps, right? So if I got to get to 12 and I've only got 2, how many do I need left? More? 10. What do you call 10 half steps? Minor 7th. It's on the table we brought out, right? Isn't that convenient? Because now the major became a minor, and the 2nd and 7th add up to 9 because that's our rule of 9. Let me keep going. 3 half steps. What do we call 3 half steps? A minor third. Y'all are starting to get this. Look at y'all. Thought you said you didn't understand. Okay. Now let's look at it from the major-minor thing. Major perfects don't change their quality when they invert, but majors and minors do. So if this one's minor, the quality that we're inverting to will become a, okay, rule of 9 says that the scale degree name is going to be add up to 9. So the third to get up to 9 is going to be 6. 3 plus 6 is 9. So this is a major 6th. Anybody know how many half steps are in a major sixth? You can look at your table, or you can say 12 minus 3 is 9 half steps. 4 half steps is called what? Major third. Amen for Jesus. It's the golden calf of modern worship music. I mean that on multiple levels, and I'm not actually kidding. Inverts to major becomes minor. Thirds become sixths because of our rule of 9. 4 half steps is going to invert to 8 half steps. 4 plus 8 is 12. Making sense? I'm going to finish this out in a second. Let's look at it from the fretboard just to confuse you further. Okay? Let's do some open strings first. Okay? So let's try with the A open string. Now when you're looking at your scale reference sheet, you might glance at the A major scale, because that's going to come into play here in a second. A half step above A is called B flat. That would be called a minor second. Because we call a half step is called a minor second. Okay? If we invert that minor second, it inverts to a major seventh of 11 half steps, and now the B flat's on the bottom and A is on the top. Okay? So here's the B flat on the bottom. If I go 11 half steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, turns out it's right here at the 12th fret, because this is 1, and we wanted to go 11. So here's my double dot. Here's B flat, and here's A. Somewhere over the rainbow, somewhere, oh. There's my on the same string. But it's B flat up to A. What's nice with guitars, I can string hop. I can get an A on the G string, 2nd fret. There's a B flat. There's a B flat. Excuse me, that's an A, and this is a B flat. So now we can go 1 up to a major 7th, 1 up to a major 7th. That's an inverted minor second. A minor second would have been A to B flat. I could catch the B flat here and the A there by doing this and do them both at the same time. Or it's actually a lot easier to do a B flat here and an A there. Right? There's my minor second. But I can invert them to a major 7th. A major 7th above B flat is what note? A. I've been doing that for a while. There's an A. You'll just have to trust me. There's an A right here on the 7th fret of the D string. So here's a major 7th right there. Yeah? Sort of, kind of. Let's look at the next one. A major second. Let's do from G. What's a major second above G? A. Because a major second is how big? 2 half steps, right? So if I go to G, start with G. Let's do it down here. Here's an open G string. I just did open string a second ago. Let's do it different. Let's do it on the D string, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G. Here's a G. What interval am I doing again?
Major second.
Major second. I thought I was, okay, it's all good. So here's a G, right? Major second, I want to go up 2 frets. Do an A. That's an A right there. I can also do the open A. So excuse me, I can also do the G here and the A here. So here's G, A, there's a major second. Bam. And if I invert them, I got the A on the bottom and the G up top. Easy G to grab is the E string, E, F, F sharp, G. Excuse me. Excuse me. A and G. What interval is that called? We're doing a major second. We inverted it. This interval is called a minor 7th. It's 10 half steps. Watch this. A up to here is B flat. That's 1. Up to B natural to open string next is 2. Fret here 3. Fret here 4. Fret here 5. Fret here 6. Next note can also be played open. Fret here 7, 8, 9, 10. 8 up to G is a minor 7th, 10 half steps. Inverted from a G up to an A, major second. Yeah? Sort of, kind of. So I'm going to go back to my chart and flesh it out. But I want you guys to write it with me. Okay? I'm going to change colors because I'm getting bored with black. What's our next one here? We've done 0 half steps through 4. What's the next one?
5.
5. What do we call 5 half steps?
4.
Perfect fourth. Y'all slow me down if it doesn't make sense. And that inverts to, now remember, perfects don't change quality. So we know it's going to be a perfect something. Perfect fifth is the right answer. How many half steps here is a 5? A fifth is 7 half steps. Yeah? Making sense? And we keep going. 6 is our wonderful tritone. Now this is going to be fun. Usually I go skip the tritone and come back, but I think you guys are catching some of this. The tritone inverts itself. It's the only interval that does that. Because if you take a tritone and you flip it upside down, it's still 6 half steps. 6 half steps either way you look at it. The tritone inverts itself. Okay, I got a couple cow eyes from some people who are on music, so let's look at some people who I know play. Look at this. The tritone inverts to a tritone. Is this? No, I'll just leave it. Okay, so from a C, what's a tritone above C? Boy, when y'all talk all that, well, you got to take turns.
A.
No. I feel the love, but y'all are totally wrong. Let's get there. 6 half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. A tritone is also called a diminished fifth, so I could go C, D, E, F, G is the 5th scale degree and go down 1. It's also the augmented fourth, so I can go C, D, E, F, which is the 4th scale degree, and go up 1. Either way, 6 half steps, C to F sharp. If I invert it, what do I do? Somebody tell me what to do to invert it. Take the C and put it on top. Now the F sharp's on the bottom. Now we're trying to call this interval what? Well, let's see how many half steps there are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What do you call 6 half steps? Everybody at once? Yeah, so a tritone, excuse me, will always invert to another tritone because it's 6 half steps both ways. Okay? Which is another reason why we started off with perfect intervals and then major diatonic ones, and then we went to minor and then left this tritone last because it's the special case. Yeah? Tritones invert themselves. Let's go back to our chart. 7 half steps is called what? Wow. I know it's late. We're on the end run here. Perfect fifth, which inverts to, on the quality wise, it stays perfect because of that rule that we learned. But now it becomes a perfect fourth. How many half steps in a perfect fourth? 5. 5 plus 7 is 12. Fourth plus fifth equals 9. Rule of 9, rule of 12, quality. We're almost done. Now we're going to 8 half steps. Now we'll look up here. Yep, look at that. 8 half steps in minor 6. And that inverts to 4 half steps. The minor becomes a major, and the 6th becomes a third. So it's easy, it's accurate to say if you invert a minor 6th, it becomes a major third. If you invert a major 2nd, it becomes a minor 7th, and so forth. 9 half steps is a major 6th, and I think you guys have got the concept enough that you could probably flesh it out, but for the sake of consistency with my horrendous handwriting, I'm still going to finish out this little chart here. Minor 7th, and you guys should follow along to make sure I don't get it wrong. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of perfect handwriting. Major 2nd, and filling out charts wrong. 11 half steps is a major 7th, one of my faves. Minor 2nd inverts 1 half step. 11 plus 1 is 12. 7 plus 2 is 9. The qualities exchange, major, minor. Yeah? So now you can see at the bottom of this invert interval page where I've got some notes, and then I said shortcuts for interval inversions. Let's make sure I didn't leave something out. The rule of 9 says that the scale degree number will always add up to 9 when you invert. 2 to a 2nd becomes a 7th because 2 plus 7 is 9. The thirds become 6th because 3 plus 6 is 9. Major intervals become minor and vice versa. Perfect remain perfect. Now, augmented becomes diminished, diminished becomes augmented. That really only applies at this point in a tritone, right? Because if I went from C to F sharp and F sharp up to C, you're gonna take the augmented fourth and make it a diminished fifth, and write the diminished fifth into an augmented fourth. Okay? Tritone always remains a tritone. That's the most important part. So take a look at this next page, and we're on the home stretch, folks. Table of intervals used in Western music. This is probably one that, if Dave is going to make a black and white version, which we all thank him for tremendously, this is probably going to need some more, because it still has a lot of black on it. So we might need to do a little, we might even just redo the whole thing, because that whole printing a lot of ink thing I didn't really think about. I want you to fill this out. I'd like for you to fill it out more than once. Okay? So you could take this similar chart, and in this column that says scale degree, at the bottom, the final row, C would be 1, right? The third row above that is D. D would be 2. But you wouldn't put anything in the second row, because C sharp and D flat are not really a scale degree. They're not part of the major scale. So you'd only have in the first column C, D, E, F, G, A, and B filled in. The rest are blank. Diatonic interval would have the same rows filled in, but you'd call it a root or a tonic. You'd call it a major second. You'd call it a perfect fifth. You'd call it a perfect fourth. Next, third column over, non-diatonic interval. You'll write what that interval is: minor second, minor sixth, or tritone for the non-diatonics, right? So to make sure we're on the same page, on diatonic intervals, you're going to have 7 of those rows filled out. On non-diatonic intervals, you're going to have 5 of those rows filled out, corresponding to the white. The 7 white keys and the 5 black keys. But on the next 2 row columns, total number of half steps and interval inversion, you will fill out every one of those. Okay? So on the bottom row C, total number of half steps should be 0. From C to D flat is 1, and so forth all the way up. And now here's the fun part. Now you write in the inversion. So a root becomes an octave. On the second row, the minor second that you wrote in on one column now becomes a major seventh. Right in their inversions on the right column.
Repeat what we did on the non-diatonic.
Absolutely. And I'll just run through the first 3 columns one more time. Column number 1, you write the scale degree, which means you're only writing the 5 in the majors, the 7 notes in the major scale: C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. So you have 5 rows blank on that column. Diatonic interval, same thing, but now you're giving it the name. And the scale degree, you're giving it a number: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Diatonic interval, you're giving it a name: root, major second, perfect fourth, and so forth. Non-diatonic interval, you're giving the other 5 notes their name: minor second, minor sixth, tritone, etc. Okay? Thus, we've now figured out how to call every interval that's on the keyboard short of an octave or shorter. Later we'll figure out that there's actually intervals larger than an octave, but we don't want to worry about that now. That actually comes way down the road. You can make a lot of music without ever knowing that there's larger intervals. Now we know how to name them. We know how to describe them several different ways. Our names are related to how many half steps they are. Now we can invert them, and we know some issues and tools on how to quickly invert them. Now I said at the very beginning, when we started the invert intervals, at some point you're going to want to know why. Why are we inverting these intervals? What is this? Is this just a mathematical, theoretical exercise? I hope I've shown you so far in the class that I want to spare people worthless, pointless, logical, theoretical, mathematical exercises. But this one is really important. And you're going to see in the next module when we start building chords with all these intervals. Okay? If you got any questions, answer them ask them on the community, and check out the homework. I made it simple, but it looks simple on the homework, module 3 and 4, but it's going to take a lot. Daily, fill out the scale practice sheet, interval table practice sheet, while applying the interval table to all 12 notes, not just the ones based from C. Number 2, work on ear training daily, all major scales on both boards. Ear training, la 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 la, every scale, both boards if you can, with your mouth and your ear. And the last one, practice creating all the intervals from all 12 notes on both boards, if you have access to both, while singing the intervals at the same time to build your ear. Yeah? perfect fourth, minor second. That's from Jaws. Do 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 do. Minor second, minor second. Ah! And then you put a tritone into the lady scream, right? Go check out the website on the intervals. It'll help you. Do this as much as you can. Repetition will really help. I would also say that you don't really get a lot of valuable things without discipline and work. It's going to take some discipline and work. The end result, more options when making music, more colors for your canvas and your palette. And when God says, I want you to play healing, you got several options on how to play when he speaks that to you. It'll be worth it, trust me. Anyway, I'll see you guys online. Thanks.